What's up, everyone? We are diving back into the multiverse today for another epic. What if Naruto built ultimate harem with all kunoichis in Desert Island Part 4? If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. In the morning, Naruto opened his eyes when he spotted the arrival of the sun through the window of his room on the cargo ship that he was currently on. The blonde genin then got to his feet off the bed and yawned a bit. He then began to recollect his thoughts and recalled just what he was doing in the ship at the moment. Tsunade had assigned him and Sakura on escort duty for a large supply of valuable medical herbs and supplies to Temujin's home continent. The reason was that since it was discovered that Temujin was next in line to lead his people after the defeat of Hado years before, he had founded a village for the remains of his fellow tribesmen and vowed to never allow anyone use them for the power of the Geller stones. Temujin and Naruto were happy to see one another, and it was a good thing to see Temujin leading his people well. In truth, Temujin had no idea how to lead his people when they asked him to lead them to this home they resided in, but in time he had been able to succeed and he was finally learning how to best lead his villagers and vowed never to repeat the mistakes he made when he was still a servant to Hado. The village had grown since then, and Temujin had sent a message to Konoha requesting trade and diplomatic relations, as he trusts the village Naruto comes from more than the others, though he makes diplomatic ties to Suna as well, as he wanted to make amends with the village that he helped to attack years before. When they met again, Temujin was pleased to see his friend and prophesized ally once more, and in true Naruto fashion, the blonde genin congratulated his comrade in succeeding. Temujin was named as king of the Gelul, and they have begun to recover the Gelul stone mines once more and ensure that the stones would no longer be fought over and his clan would use them not for conquest but for defense and peace. Temujin had been busy for the past few years and had been working as a leader in the same fashion as Akage, as his family were in fact the ruling leaders of the clan. Naruto and Sakura were given a lavish time by Temujin, and the two would often spar with one another to relive the old days when they fought one another, though this time it was in a truly friendly and respectful fashion. The supplies the two had escorted to getting there had been placed to good use by Temujin's fellow leaders, and he was pleased with the results at the moment. They were then able to return back home to Konoha as soon as the mission was now considered complete. Naruto yawned and decided to get out of his room for some fresh air, or close to that, as he was not a very big fan of long sea travels. Not that he got seasick, but the smell of too much salt had a slight annoyance to his nose at the moment. He got on his jacket and his forehead protector and headed out and made his way to see the ocean, and as he made it from the crew's quarters, he saw Sakura there, looking at the ocean, and he smiled. When he had been told he would be going to see Temujin, he was happy to finally see a familiar face, and even more so when he was told that Sakura was coming along. He was happy to know that his long-time crush was coming with him, though he was curious why neither Kakashi, Yamato, or Sai were not coming along. Tsunade reminded him that Kakashi was currently leading Asuma's team after his death, while Yamato was taking Kurenai's place in leading Hinata, Shino, Kiba and Akamaru on missions. Sai was still on his own duties as well as learning about emotions and expressions. The blonde boy had to admit that at least in the emotions department, Sai was a lot more expressive than Sasuke, and at least he was honest enough with his thoughts, though he was a lot more cautious with his actions this time. He walked over to Sakura and leaned on the same rail and spoke. It was a good mission, and seeing Temujin again was not so bad. I guess. How are you feeling? Still having a bad reaction to all the salt air, Naruto-kun? A little, but I'll be fine, Sakura-chan. Say, care to grab something to eat for today? They might not have ramen here, but the food should be good for eating. Sakura looked at Naruto and smiled a bit at that and agreed with a nod. Come on then, but you're paying for the meals. It's only fair since I paid for the rest last time. Naruto nodded and gulped a bit as he took out his favorite frog wallet and then took out the money, and the two got to the galley, and as time passed, they were able to buy some good food, and they then sat down and began to eat their food. Naruto's luck in gambling had paid off big time recently, and he was able to win a very sizable pot of money, and he used that to keep his time in the trip all right. Sakura had paid for their meal previously, and it was fair that he paid for this meal in his way, and he didn't mind. He had only taken a portion of his winnings on this mission, while the rest had been hidden in his apartment for a rainy day. As they ate their food, Naruto thought about the situation before him as he looked at Sakura. he knew that was still the same woman he loved and cared for, and it was a nice thing that they were doing this mission together and there would be nothing that could break the moment. However, he knew better than to try something stupid on her, as she had the same level of strength as Tsunade. He recalled the warning of Captain Yamato when he tried to sneak a peek on the women's side of the hot springs before, and he was not in the mood to be suddenly caught by the pink-haired kunoichi, and he doubted that even the Kyuubi's healing chakra would be enough to help him recover from the beating he would give from Sakura if she caught him. Naruto was so deep in thought on the matter that Sakura was a bit worried about why Naruto seemed so lost at the moment. Naruto-kun, you alright? Huh, oh it's nothing, just thinking about how nice it is to have some peace for a change. Yes, it is. Naruto thought about the peace they had at the moment and silently wished that this was the chance he could finally tell Sakura how much he felt about her, but he was not sure about a lot of things, which was ironic, given his usual disposition on things. He thought about his promise to Sakura to find and rescue Sasuke, for both their sakes. For him he was a good friend, and for Sakura because she loved his teammate, and to see Sakura happy would make him happy as well. I won't give up yet, I will be stronger to find Sasuke, Sakura-chan. Sakura saw that and smiled a bit. Even if they were not yet able to convince Sasuke to return with them to Konoha, they were not going to give up yet in their respective hopes to save their teammate from Orochimaru, though at the moment, the two and Kabuto had vanished from the sight of the spies and contacts of Konoha, and the two knew that Sound Village had already been abandoned by Orochimaru when they went there previously, so who knew just where Orochimaru and Sasuke had hidden themselves this time? I know, we'll find him yet, Naruto-kun, but for now, we need to relax a bit more. As the day wore on, the ship was getting ready to move on to the next shipping lane. However, it was then that a massive number of storm clouds were spotted, and the captain passed word that everyone not needed on the decks at the moment were to remain in the quarters assigned to them at the moment. However, both ninjas saw the clouds and knew quickly that the situation would not be so simple as anyone thought, and sure enough the storms proved to be relentless, and as waves and high winds came at the ship, there was no sign of lightning at the moment, so this was going to be a strong storm, and the waves proved it. Already there were massive waves coming in, and the movement of the boat began to make a number of passengers seasick, except Naruto and Sakura, as they held on and hoped that the ship would make it through the storm unharmed. However, when they left the rooms that they were staying in at the moment, things were about to get worse, as one of the crew rushed in, and he was not happy at the moment despite all the water on his face. Naruto had a sinking feeling as he spoke to the sailor. What's wrong? The winds, torn up one of the main sails, were trying to fix it, but the storm's making the situation worse. Naruto may not have been a sailor, but he knew that if the main mast fell then they were all in trouble. He saw the same in Sakura's face and he spoke to the sailor. We're ninjas from Konoha, do you guys need help? You're ninja, we don't have anyone who needs to be dealt with, but if you can help us keep the main sail from going down then that's a help. The captain's going to be in the main deck starting the repairs on the mast and its reinforcement, better hurry if you want to pitch in. Naruto and Sakura nodded and made their way to the main deck, and sure enough, the sailors were doing their best to keep the sails intact and the two ninja did their best to fix the situation, but it was then that the captain was shocked by an incoming sight. Oh no! The two turned and before them was another ship heading right for them. The sailors tried their best to signal the other ship that they were heading right for them, but when the captain looked with his telescope and saw an even more dangerous sight, there was no one on the helm, and no one as far as he could see. The ship had been abandoned, and it was going to slam into them. He turned and told the crew to get ready for the collision and told Naruto and Sakura to hurry and abandon ship, and they knew that this situation had just gotten grim to the core, and despite the storm, the two got their backpacks and were able to finally reach a lifeboat and quickly lowered themselves despite the weather, and not a moment too soon as other lifeboats were seen, and then a mighty crash was heard and both of them turned to see the two ships smash into one another with a sound that resembled two buildings smashing hard into one another. The two were quickly guided out of the crash by the storm waves, and they could do little but try their best to hold on and ride the storm out. Thankfully they were able to make it, and then as the weather became more manageable for them, they were able to get out the oars that were thankfully lashed tightly to the boat, and they began to make their way out through the calmer waters. It was then that the two were still hit by the winds, and the cold water they were drenched in was made even colder by the winds blowing on them, and Naruto felt his teeth chatter on one another at the moment, and it was then that the Kyuubi spoke. Damn it, Kit, you had better not die just yet. Here, this should help. Sure enough, the blonde genin was suddenly flooded by welcome warmth from the chakra from the Kyuubi inside of him, and it was then that they spotted what appeared to be an island a fair distance from where they were. They looked about and saw that there were no other boats in their direction at the moment, and the day was getting much darker, meaning that while the storm had weakened somewhat, the day was soon becoming night and they couldn't afford to remain out there, so despite the harsh efforts, the cold winds, the high waves and the darkness, they wasted no time until they were now on the island as the night fell on them. As they made it to the beach, Naruto was tired and so was Sakura, but they pulled the boat in as the storm played all over the island and sent winds all over the place. The two ninja were able to secure the boat on some strong rocks and then looked for shelter, and they spotted a nearby cave and they went there, and before they went in, Naruto was told by the Kyuubi some advice. Better check if there's anything else living here in the cave first before you bunk down, kid. The last thing we need is snakes and poisonous bugs in here. Grab a flare and let's scare them out quickly. Naruto agreed and used one of the still dry flares that he had been able to get from the small container from the boat and then lit it up, and they searched the cave, and thankfully there were no wild creatures in the cave at the moment, but there was plenty of dry wood in the cave and lots of dry grass and leaves, perfect for starting a fire, which Naruto did with the flare. It took a bit of time to gather the supplies needed for a hot fire, but they were finally able to get one going, and the heat was very much welcomed by the two as they were still in their wet clothes, and had no choice but to dry them while they were wearing them. Sakura felt very cold and her teeth chattered, and Naruto quickly noted that and was worried. Sakura-chan, better get closer to the fire, your teeth are chattering. I know, it's so cold, and my clothes are still somewhat wet. Naruto then spoke, carefully, as he wanted to explain his intentions properly and not have Sakura misinterpret what he was about to say to her. We would have to share body heat, Sakura-chan, you'll have to get closer to me, but I swear that I won't do anything stupid. Sakura nodded and knew that this was a better move, and she hugged Naruto, and then the two were feeling a lot warmer as they were able to lie down with Sakura hugging Naruto for warmth. Their stomach growled, but exhaustion and sleepiness combined were much stronger than hunger, and they fell asleep as the howling winds continued to lash the island. The next day, Naruto looked about as he woke up early and tried to get his bearings on where they had landed after fleeing the collision of their ship and that of yet another ship that was apparently abandoned by the crew. He and Sakura were lucky that they were able to reach a large lifeboat and had made it to the island. He turned and saw Sakura was still sleeping in the cave that they had found. The cave would have made a good shelter, but the Kyuubi had told him that they would have to consider moving inland as some areas of the cave were somewhat unstable, and he had to agree with the Kyuubi's statement, but for the moment, they had to find food soon. Man, where do we find food out here? That's easy, kid. All we have to do is find the right signs of food and we're good to go. Come on, let's get moving. What about Sakura-chan? She'll be fine. We have to worry about finding the food first. Better check what gear we have to work with first. Naruto checked his pockets and was relieved that his wallet was safe and with him, though the money would have to be dried up and used for other things. His kunai pouch was still there and was still loaded with kunai, and his back pouch had a few shuriken left, and there was this ball of hard and durable string that he kept close. The Kyuubi noted those and smiled a bit in its cage. Good. Just enough basic gear. Come on, let's go see what else is here on the island beach. Food can be found on beaches if you know where to look. The two took off and Naruto goes first into the island to find what he could use to hunt for food and look for a source of water. The Kyuubi served as the second set of eyes and ears and also decides to share its centuries of knowledge to its host, ensure mutual survival at the moment, though the Kyuubi had long since developed a strong though still somewhat mocking respect for the blonde-haired genin who served as his jailer. Granted, he had plans to escape once he got the chance, but not right now. Besides, he had to admit that he found quite a lot of fun fighting good enemies with the kid around. The two spotted a large bunch of bamboo trees, and the Kyuubi directed Naruto to grab some of the fallen wood for use, and the bamboo was perfect as it was still strong and thick and still light. As they moved on, the two spotted some palm trees and saw the coconuts there, and the blonde ninja was told by the Kyuubi what to do with those. Come on, kid, time to learn how to climb and get them coconuts. What for? The Kyuubi growled and replied. Those things are good sources of water, you know, and the edible flesh in the coconut are good sources of nutrition, and the oils you can find in the coconut meat can be very helpful in countering sunburn, and the oils are nice smelling because no way are you two going to be comfortable with each other smelling rank. The blonde genin used his cage bushin to help him climb up and use his kunai to cut down the coconuts. The Kyuubi explained how to pick the right ones, since the ones which were large and green were certainly worthy of the time and effort. He cut down the coconuts while another cage bushin would retrieve the coconuts. As soon as he had enough, the blonde genin looked for anything worth eating, and spotted large clumps of plants with bunches of deep violet fruits, and the Kyuubi quickly recognized them. Those are wild grapes. Great, the fruits, perfect for eating, and the vitamins and minerals will be helpful, plus the leaves are very much edible. Gather some for now, Kit. This is looking good. All we need now is some meat for the much needed protein. Fish is a good choice, let's go see if we can catch some. The two hunted near several areas where fish were frequently seen, and sure enough, there were a lot of fish nearby, though they were careful as there was a chance sharks were in the area. However, the two were lucky that a nearby cove was a good spot for catching fresh fish. In an hour or two the duo had caught several large fish for breakfast, and the blonde ninja had used one of his kunai as a spear to catch the fish by tying it securely to the long bamboo pole. The two made it back, and Naruto began to gut the fish with his kunai to remove the guts and organs which were not needed at the moment, though the fish livers were good to eat. The blonde was then able to start a fire with some salvaged flint nearby and a good amount of dried wood and leaves and weeds. The fish were then placed on spits, and he surrounded the fire with his catches and worked on cracking the coconuts. The smells of cooking fish was enough to rouse Sakura, and the pink-haired kunoichi was happy to smell food. She had not eaten much last night, and the smell of cooked food was a good thing. She got up and walked over to Naruto as he finished opening the last coconut. Naruto-kun, that smells great. Naruto turned and smiled warmly at Sakura, happy to see that his teammate and longtime crush was alive and well, and he was happy that she had finally woken up. Their efforts in making it to this island was tiring, and unlike her, his stamina was much greater than hers, and the Kyuubi's healing gift certainly came in handy. Good to see you up and about, Sakura-chan. Here, there's some wild grapes and water from the coconuts for you. The fish is going to take some time to cook. You made this for us both. Thank you. But aren't you going to eat, Naruto-kun? I will. I just need to wait for the fish to cook properly, and then we can really eat. Besides, you were really worn out from all the effort we had to do to get here, Sakura-chan. I'll be fine while you need to eat. Sakura knew that due to the Kyuubi inside Naruto, his stamina and healing ability far outshined her own, though she was very worried about the negative effects of this gift. As she recalled the time she had seen Naruto use the powers of the Kyuubi when they fought with Orochimaru and Kabuto months before, she placed that out of her mind as she drank the water from the coconuts that Naruto had gathered, as well as the sweet grapes and the coconut meat, which she scrapped off using her own kunai, and she felt her body recover as she had been very hungry for hours as she slept. As the day wore on, the smell of well-cooked fish told Naruto and Sakura that their meals were ready, and after getting the fish away from the fire and letting the fish cool, they enjoyed the taste of well-cooked fish meat. It didn't take long for the two to finish their food, and there on the ground of the cave were the fish bones, and the coconut husks and shells. The two even ate the leaves of the grapes and found them to be rather tasty and worth the effort of finding. They too decided to rest for a bit, and as soon as they felt their energies come back, they decided to go to the lifeboat that they had left behind earlier that night, and it seemed that Sakura's advice in dragging the boat in and tying it to the nearby rocks had proven to be a good move for them both, and they were happy to see that it was relatively intact at the moment. There were some leftover supplies that they had managed to grab from the ship, and those were very helpful. Temujin had given them some of the medical supplies as thanks, and Sakura knew that these would come in handy for both her and Naruto while they were on this island until rescue came for them, though she knew that it would be a while before word of the accident that stranded them here would reach Konoha, and then rescue would be attempted. The anti-venom would help them on the chance they would be bitten by anything poisonous in the island, plus the slaves and ointments, as limited as they were, would help. She had no doubt that the Kyuubi would not let Naruto die, not out of concern for her teammate but for its own safety, but she was not going to let Naruto rely too heavily on the Kyuubi for aid. Despite her caring for Sasuke's return to Konoha, she had felt that things had changed too much for the past 2.5 years for her to think about her past love for Sasuke. She was still unsure at the moment on what to do when they would someday meet again. Rescuing him was first to come to mind, but was it from Orochimaru or from himself? But she placed that aside for now as she and Naruto began to gather what they could bring and explore the island that they were currently on at the moment. The island was very large and apparently was having several springs of fresh water deeper inland, and the two were careful as they went ever deeper into the island as they had no idea just what was on the island that could be a threat. They were able to spot animal tracks, and the two followed them and found themselves in a large valley that was a fair but manageable distance from the beach they were on before, and the valley had a clear river making its way from the mountains into the beach. This was a great sign, and the fact that there was a lake nearby further added to the relief the two ninja felt as they saw the valley. Wow, this place is great. Yeah, makes me wonder why no one's lived here before. The two looked and went in and found the valley to be rather thick with grass and bushes, and many of the trees that were in the area were healthy and very much good things to see in an island that was rather large to say the least, and the two were still in awe until they felt the heat of the sun and sought some shade and found it near a large rocky outcropping that offered good shade for the midday sun. As they made it there, the blonde genin began to feel rather hungry, and he could tell that Sakura was also hungry as well. Sakura-chan, I'll go and see if I can find more food. You can stay here and rest a bit if you like. Sakura, however, wanted to be useful and help Naruto with the effort of surviving on the island until they were rescued by the people of their village, who would no doubt be sent by Tsunade once word came to her back in the Hokage Tower. No, Naruto-kun, I am more than able to take care of myself, and we need to work together to survive here. Come on, let's go hunting. Naruto smiled as they took off to find what they could. He used his kage bushin to make it much easier for them to scout out the entire island rather than spending days looking everywhere by themselves, and that was a good move on his part as they were quickly covering ground. The two had found several rabbit tracks and, amazingly enough, signs of deer tracks as well. The two followed the tracks, and there, they spotted several deer nearby, and despite the fact that they had no idea how to catch one at the moment, the Kyuubi was more than willing to help out with some advice. Grab some of those long branches and sharpen them with your kunai and you can have traps to use. You have a plan. Oh yes. Naruto followed the Kyuubi's instructions, and he then whispered them to Sakura, who was curious why Naruto seemed to be so silent. The only times he was like this was when the subject got his interest. She knew that for a fact, as she had seen him like that on more than one instance, and showing both logic and sense when she and Sasuke would have some difficulty on the subject in question, namely when they first met Rock Lee, and both her and Sasuke made the mistake of not seeing how fiercely Lee trained in taijutsu. And when he had fought with that chakra-stealing kunoichi Fuka when they first ran into Sora, he had displayed his ability to be very analytical and precise when the situation demanded it from him, as he defeated her and used her weaknesses to defeat her cleanly, though he had been badly hurt at the time. She was then told about the Kyuubi's advice and had to agree with it, as despite her strength and her training as a ninja, she had no doubt the deer before them would be hard to capture, and even more so if they escaped in the forests, and they would lose them in the woods, making it even harder for them to track them. They moved away, and thankfully they were not heard at the moment, and that allowed them to prepare a trap for the deer. Naruto chopped the branches to have sharp points, and he made them point upward at an angle on the ground from top to bottom, and he reinforced the massive spike traps with rocks to make sure they would hold. The spikes were placed in a depression nearby, and the two realized that they could only catch one deer, and therefore they had to time it just right for them to catch one. Naruto quickly unleashed a horde of kage bushin, and they quickly moved into the forest while he and Sakura waited, and then the sound of panicking animals was heard, and sure enough the deer were running about everywhere as Naruto's kage bushin herded them towards the traps. Some got away from the kage bushin while others were brought in further. Some of the herded creatures managed to escape, but that was when a large and well-fed deer was chased right into the traps, and the deer screamed loudly as it was pierced by the spike traps that Naruto and Sakura had set up. The deer struggled to escape, but it died as one of the spikes had hit the heart, and it died quickly. It was not a pleasant sight, but it was needed after all. Naruto hefted the slain deer on his back after it stopped bleeding, despite the weight, and the two made it back to the rock outcropping that was more stable than the cave they had stayed in before. When they arrived at the site, Naruto began to cut up the deer with his kunai while Sakura decided to get herself cleaned up a bit with a short bath, and she reached the lake and washed herself from all the dirt, grime, and sweat that had been on her since they had managed to sneak into the forest and force the deer to fall into their trap. She had some doubts that it would work, but Naruto's assurance made it easier, and the results were certainly worth the effort, and now they had something good to eat for their late lunch. The pink-haired kunoichi washed her face in her hair and wished that she had her soap at the moment, but decided not to worry about the situation for the time being as she finished wiping off the dirt and grime, and the cool water in the lake certainly helped her in dealing with the heat, though she had to be careful about getting too cold. It was then that she realized that Naruto was going to need help as she had learned about the extensive exhaustion one can suffer when using Kage Bushin constantly. Her clothes were not too dirty and were still good to wear, though she knew that she would have to clean and wash them sooner or later. As she finished cleaning up and headed for the rocky outcropping, she saw Naruto was tired, ragged and filthy, and that was to be expected as he had been working hard on the deer carcass and there nearby was several large chunks of meat and the blonde gasped a bit as he sat back and groaned as he moved his arms. Man, I am tired. Sakura nodded and commented on the smell coming from him. And you smell rank, go take a bath first, Naruto. Naruto decided not to argue, and besides, a cool bath was certainly a good thing for him. He made his way to the lake and washed his clothes first to get rid of the dirt, leftover deer blood, and the smell as well. He wished he had a washing machine or some detergent but decided not to complain, and as soon as his clothes were now clean he draped them on the stones nearby and let them dry as he bathed in the lake and enjoyed the cool waters. He was so calm and relaxed that he let his guard down and was not aware that he had an audience at the moment. Sakura had finished gathering firewood to cook their food and she had managed to cook several of the sliced meat on some sticks to be properly cooked, and she took the time to relax, and when the food was cooking nicely, she decided to see if Naruto was done with his bath, unaware of the fact that Naruto was surfacing from his dive underwater to check his clothes, and this allowed Sakura to see Naruto nod, from head to waist. Sakura gasped and blushed bright red at the sight of her teammate being nod. Despite the fact that the lake was a fair distance from the rock outcropping, she was still able to see Naruto there taking a bath, and she couldn't help but see how well built he had become since she had last seen him. Granted, she couldn't see all the details at the distance, but she could see enough to see that Naruto was fit and very strong at the moment. There was no sign of fat on him, and as he got out of the water and reached his clothes, she was able to see more. What am I doing? Sakura quickly looked away and busied herself with the cooking meat and hoped that the look of the fire, well-cooked meat, and the smell of roasting venison would be enough for her to forget the sight of Naruto buck nod at the moment. It was when Naruto arrived that she turned and saw that Naruto had decided not to zip his jacket to get cooler as the sun was now overhead. The blonde genin smiled as he picked up the smell of the cooking meat. The stuff smells great and there's plenty of meat for dinner too. Shall we eat, Sakura-chan? Yeah, the meat was very much good and tasted well, and they were able to fill their stomachs quickly with good food, and that was enough to make them feel more relaxed. They took the time to rest as the rock outcropping was like an arch and resembled a cave in a way but was not that big and provided some decent shelter from the sun, and the two got some sleep but not before cooking the rest of the meat and saving it for dinner. The Kage Bushin Naruto had deployed all poofed away, and Naruto was once more exhausted and rested for the time being while Sakura stood guard over him, and this allowed her to really see Naruto. She couldn't help but notice how much Naruto had changed over the time they had been apart, and she couldn't help but wonder how much he had trained to help the village and rescue Sasuke. She knew that despite their past, the two were a good team and her friends, in a rivalry sort of way. However, due to Orochimaru messing with Sasuke's mind and then the arrival of Itachi had driven a deep wedge with the two, and seeing Sasuke willing to kill Naruto had begun to make her wonder how things would turn out between them when they met again. In the meantime, she studied her only companion on the island for the moment. Naruto's face was now stripped of the baby fat and was lean, hard, but very pleasing to the eyes, making her realize that Naruto had certainly grown up despite his still somewhat present immaturity at times, and he was certainly a good-looking guy. She quickly realized where her train of thoughts were going and blushed bright red and quickly walked outside to get some of her common sense back. Why am I thinking these things? I can't possibly be thinking of that right now. Oh yes, you are, girl. Shut up. I am not thinking about Naruto that way. Why? You already admitted he's good looking already. Had we known he'd turn this handsome after a few years, then damn. I can't have him like that. He's like a little brother with his attitude. Ah, then he's the hot little brother despite the fact you're the same age as he is, and those muscles, yummy. Shut up. Why should I? For that matter, why should we? Maybe we can see what his muscles look like up close while he's sleeping. I will not. It's indecent and it's scandalous. Who's going to know? We're the only ones on this island to begin with. Besides, I doubt he'd complain. He's had a crush on us for years, why not let him live out his dreams and fantasies? I won't do it. I'd look like a hussy to Naruto-kun. Ah, you used to ignore him a lot and treat him badly, but now you're nice to him. Is it because of Sasuke-kun's words before those years ago, or is it something more? Sakura thought about it and couldn't help but recall how she used to badmouth Naruto, and when Sasuke told her to be nicer to Naruto, she did so because Sasuke asked her to do so, but through it all, she got to see Naruto as a kind and brave young man, truly a one of a kind, and he had such compassion that it was unnerving at times. She began to really care for him, and the times he risked death to save her made her all the more aware of how deep his feelings were for her. Namely during the missions they took in the failed attempt to rescue and return Sasuke to Konoha, and she couldn't help but wonder how much had changed for them both. She was willing to fight Sasuke to save Naruto, something she knew she might not have done had they been back in their younger days. Before she could answer, Naruto woke up, and then she decided to end the conversation with her inner self. She had become more comfortable with herself, but this situation was quite different, and that was why she decided to revert to her past method of keeping opiniosin to herself. The two got to eating the remaining meat for the nightly dinner, and they had found other food as well, including edible mushrooms, wild grapes, wild apples, wild pears, and oranges as well. There was a large bounty of food in the island if one knew where to look. In Naruto's cage, Bushin had found something interesting. There was another ship a fair distance from them, but it was a wreck, but there could be useful salvage there as well. The two decided to take a look at the wreckage and see if there was anything left that they could be able to use until they were rescued. For tonight they would sleep and start out in the morning, and Naruto allowed Sakura to sleep first while he and his cage Bushin took first watch, and then he would sleep while his cage Bushin took turns watching the area. The next day, Naruto managed to wake up early as the slivers of dawn's early light made their presence known. He opened his eyes and decided to relight the fire they had and gathered some of their stored lumber and got a good fire going to deal with the cool morning air. The warmth was nice as Sakura was still resting, allowing Naruto to gather his thoughts, and the Kyuubi then spoke. Come on, kid, time to go hunting. We aren't going to catch break fast by staying here. Naruto agreed, and the two went hunting. They entered the forest, and the blonde genin was helped by the Kyuubi. In gathering food, he found a handful of fruit like the ones from last night and all good to eat and fresh as well. He also found some more edible wild mushrooms and some berries. Along the way, Naruto spotted a pair of rabbits and quietly took out his kunai and then moved quickly to attack, with the Kyuubi helping out as it provided Naruto with better senses. And bingo! 2 freshly killed rabbits for breakfast. That and the fruits as well as the edible mushrooms was certainly good for the day. He made it back and skinned the rabbits and decided to keep the skins for other uses later on as he cooked the meat, and Sakura woke up and they had their breakfast. As dawn came and lit up the valley they were currently in, they decided to go and find anything that could help them from the found wreckage, and as they made their way through the forest and to the other side of the island, which was rather tiring and hard work, they found the wreck and found the ship to have been a supply and trade ship, and while most of the larger supplies of cargo were gone, there were some still usable supplies in the wreckage and the holds. They found some boxes with cloth sheets that could prove very useful to them, along with soap and even a few toothbrushes and toothpaste, something they knew would really help, a crate that had amazingly dry clothes that were for everyday use, including some undergarments, both for men and women, and the female garments was the reason Sakura clonked Naruto lightly on the head when he displayed them to her. The other supplies were some tools such as hammers, a pair of axes, pliers, nails, metal wire, and even some grease. There were also some leftover lamps that were still working and some fuel left. There were also other supplies that the two found, namely fishing supplies such as line, rods, and fish hooks. There were also cooking utensils such as pots, cups, knives, and more, even several bottles of spices that somehow kept dry and unspoiled by time, telling them that the ship had been here before they were, no doubt weeks or even months old. There were light containers and bags that could prove very useful, along with other tools. The two hauled what they could carry while Naruto's cage Bushin carried the extras, and after a few hours they made it back to their camp of outcropping rock and began to place the supplies aside and went hunting. They managed to down another deer with the same trap and herding method but in the different place, and Naruto caught some fish with the new fishing supplies from a nearby river. They also found more wild fruit and more edible herbs that they could also use to season their food. The two then got to work in improving their shelter in the valley. The rock outcropping formed a cave-like structure and they used the axes to cut down some trees and bamboo as well to make the shelter more roomy and durable. They also took the time to craft a sturdy hanging rack to hang either clothes or food to dry, and that was a good thing. The work was streamlined by the presence of the cage Bushin Naruto made, along with Sakura's own as well. By the time the shelter was done, it had extra walls of wood and something of a drain to send the water away from the interior of the cave, making it more cozy to live in. The ninja gathered leaves and formed beds for them to sleep on and a fire pit outside as well to cook food and a small shelf inside to house what items they had at the moment. After all the effort, Naruto and Sakura had a good hearty meal as they used their food to have their lunch, and afterwards they took the time to at least enjoy the situation they were in, as most people they knew would have called this place a paradise at the moment. And the place was certainly good to look at. Naruto was being helped by the Kyuubi in making some other tools such as traps, makeshift spears, hunting tools and more. Sakura likewise looked for any medicinal herbs that could be helpful in treating injuries that they would suffer while they were here on the island, and to ensure that they would have a supply of medicine on hand to use when the time and situation demanded it. As the day wore on, the two decided to train in their respective fashions. Sakura kept her strength training by shattering large blocks of stone a distance away from the valley near the field of rocks that were near the hills a fair distance from the valley, while Naruto kept himself in top shape in his own way by using the cage Bushin as training aids. When the time came for dinner, Naruto decided to go hunting in the beach and see what other food items he could find on the beach. Naruto was helped by the Kyuubi as they hunted in the tidal pools and found some crabs that were fresh, and while Naruto had some difficulty catching them and avoid getting pinched, he was able to catch a handful of them. Apart from crabs, the Kyuubi told him to go swimming in the deeper waters and he was able to spot some shellfish, and with his kunai managed to get some oysters as well, along with some handfuls of edible green seaweed. As Naruto continued to search for food, he was guided by the Kyuubi to the beach and to his amazement, found a small number nests and saw some fresh eggs there. Those are bird eggs, perfect food, let's grab some and take them with us before the birds come back. Kit. Naruto took the eggs and after gathering that much food, he made his way back into the island with his pouch full of his catches of the day. The dinner was delicious for them and they were able to relax a bit and looked at the stars outside of their camp, and Naruto asked a question to Sakura as they sat there outside of their camp. Sakura-chan, do you think there's other things living up there? What do you mean by that? I don't know really, but I heard someone say that maybe there's other beings up there who are looking right back at us and wondering if there's any life here. That's kind of odd, Naruto-kun. As far as I know, no one's ever said anything like that before. I guess, but those stars are beautiful, aren't they? Yes they are. Kind of like you. Naruto realized the slip of the tongue and looked to see Sakura staring at him, and he realized that she had heard those words. What did you say, Naruto-kun? Well, I said the stars were beautiful, like you. Sakura's eyes widened at that and she couldn't help but feel something stir in her heart at that, and she was about to speak when the winds began to pick up and then they spotted what appeared to be clouds moving in and they took cover, knowing that a storm was coming. For the next few days the two worked hard in making things bearable in the island they were currently on. Their shelter proved to be tough and sturdy and they made several signal fires on the island's beaches and sea cliffs to make sure that if they spotted a ship, they would be able to light the fires and signal the ship to come to their location. Naruto had kept his older clothes dry and safe and wore only a pair of jeans, boxers, a shirt and his sandals, and wore his normal clothes when in the camp. He would have a cotton cloth bandana on his head to keep him cool in the sun when he would routinely look at the sea for a sign of a boat with his custom-made old-style telescope that relied on some quartz as a lens. The Kyuubi taught him to hot make the device so that they could see any passing ships, as the wreck they had no spare telescope for them to use at the moment. He also had one made for Sakura so they would take routine rotation in trying to spot a ship coming their way. Along with this and some flint fire starters, the two would have a routine made out for the past few days. They hunted and gathered their food both inland and on the boat they would have with them either alone or together, routinely patrol the island to their signal fire spots and search for any signs of a ship, train and keep themselves fit as well as alert, and relax at the same time to avoid stressing themselves out. The two ninja, however, were also rather distracted at times. Sakura wondered about her growing and more mature attraction to Naruto, something that started the day she learned he was a Jinchuriki and how much he would sacrifice to keep her safe to save Sasuke and keep his promise to her. She recalled all the times he risked his life for her and how he would train hard to bring Sasuke back to see her happy again. She knew how much Naruto cared for her and knew that deep in his heart he loved her, but after all this time in their history, she didn't know if Naruto still liked her the way he normally did or maybe he only liked her as a good friend. Had he given up on her already after so long? That was a question she had in her mind for all this time they were on the island. Sure, she could see that he cared deeply for her happiness, safety, and well-being, and she knew that he had those same concerns when they were younger. Her inner self would try and goad her into seducing Naruto to know his feelings and thoughts towards her, but she resisted the idea, because she was unsure and somewhat afraid. If she did something wrong, she could very well sour the very strong friendship she had with Naruto, and she didn't want to lose him like she did Sasuke. She knew she cared for him, but was it truly the kind of affection befitting a more intimate relationship? And did he care for her in that same way too? Or had he given up? Naruto, on the other hand, was also worried about how to act around Sakura. Truth be told, there were times he found himself staring at her with shameless abandon, and despite his fear of her wrath if she caught him looking at her in a perverted way. He always saw her as the most attractive girl he had ever seen. Even when they were at the academy, he never joined the bullies in teasing Sakura when they were still little and considered her cute and beautiful when they were older, but now, being on this island had made him even more aware of how attractive Sakura was. Even though he did like her long hair back then in their younger days, he had to admit that Sakura was attractive in his eyes with her short hair, and she was certainly better in build now than back when they were younger. He sometimes saw himself staring at her longingly and with awe at how much she had changed. She recalled seeing her work on curing Gaara's brother Kankuro before and how determined and skilled she was. She was beautiful then and still is now. It made his heart beat faster. But can she love him back? Sure, they had become more comfortable with each other now, but can she love him back the way he always dreamed of? Naruto knew she still had feelings for Sasuke, and despite his own desire to be with his friend Sasuke again, it still made his heart ache in knowing that Sakura would always love Sasuke and not him. He recalled how his heart ached and felt like he had been stabbed seeing Sakura cry over Sasuke in happiness. But he was mature enough to let them be and care only for her happiness. And to see Sakura in great tears made him sad. Even though he saw her cry over him before, he had a feeling things would be different if Sasuke was with them. If Sasuke was the only person to make Sakura happy, then he would rescue him for her, even if he knew that he would end up having his heart broken and shattered all over again if he did. However, the two were not aware of the fact that the Kyuubi was observing the two of them, and it had a plan. It was well aware of the deep feelings Naruto had for his pink-haired teammate, and those feelings were still there even after he had nearly been gone for 3 years. It knew how much Naruto loved Sakura and wanted to see her happy and enjoying life. It was one of the reasons why it was a bit angry at how Naruto had been hurt when Sakura hugged Sasuke when the Uchiha had recovered, and how much of a broken heart his container had when he saw that. Its long-time loathing and hatred for the Uchiha and their Sharingan was further heated by how callously the raven-haired brat acted at times. And the battle at the Valley of the End further made it very angry. Naruto risked both their lives to help save his friend, and to make Sakura happy. Such devotion towards the happiness of another despite all the pain, hardship, and heartache was not unknown to demons like itself, and in truth it was a rare and admirable trait to him and his kind, as this was rarely seen in this day and age, as many humans had made so many colossal mistakes that had marred the land and its generations. Such devotion was rare now, and to know that his container was that kind of person was a very interesting fact, and it was annoying him how the two would dance away from one another. It had observed a number of changes with Sakura, and it began to see that there was a great chance that these two could finally come clean with how they felt instead of pretending that everything was the same between them. And it had a plan, and it was about to come to full circle as Sakura went out for a moment to get some herbs outside that they knew would add flavor to the fish, and this would give the demon fox plenty of time. Kit, we need to talk. We're talking now, aren't we? Not that way, Kit. Face to face. Make a cage bushin' and then we'll have that long talk, something I think we both needed to have for a long time, and now is a very good time have this conversation. Naruto had no idea what was going on, but the Kyuubi sounded serious and he did so, the Kyuubi's signature red chakra flowed out of him as he created the single Kage Bushin, and the Kage Bushin growled a bit, and when Naruto saw the slightly different looks the Kage Bushin had, it told him quickly that the Kyuubi had a serious plan if it was able to possess a single Kage Bushin. In Konoha, Tsunade was not very happy with the current situation as she looked over the documents and was happy that the only consolation was that both Sakura and Naruto were last seen alive by the survivors of the midship collision. The fact that the two ninja were side by side during the whole situation and when they escaped was good news to the blonde Hokage as she stood up and looked through the windows of Konoha. The place seemed a bit more dull without the blonde troublemaker causing all sorts of chaos, though many would agree that the piece was nice. She personally liked it when the blonde livened the place up with his antics. The piece had become so dull that she was starting to feel senile in her actual age at the moment and wished the blonde would just pop in the room and shout like he usually did. She would even allow him to call her Obasan for this once, and she wouldn't sock him on the head for it either. She turned and there was a knock on the door, and in walked none other than Shizune and Jiraiya. The Sannin had been rather worried when he got word that Naruto and Sakura had been in a massive boating accident on their way back from Temujin's continent, and he had decided to mount a mission to locate his student and Tsunade's own student. The Sannin, however, was smiling as he had found some promising leads. What is it, Jiraiya? I've located S large island that is a site of a previous boating accident, similar to the one suffered by Sakura and Naruto, though the previous accident was different. A few elders in the village we visited previously were part of that said accident and have the island located on a map that I purchased from them. The map shows the island's location, and it's not far from where Naruto and Sakura's boat was rammed accidentally, and since it's the only island at the moment that's close to the area where their boats were damaged, that's the best place for them to be found. Shizune nodded as she stepped forward and placed a navigational map on Tsunade's desk and pointed out the route taken by the ship Naruto and Sakura had been on when they went to Temujin's continent and where the island was located. I agree with Jiraiya-sama, Tsunade-sama, this island is the best place for us to find Naruto-kun and Sakura-kun. We will have to organize a small fleet, but we've gotten word from Wave Country that they will be willing to loan their ships and crews to help us find Naruto-kun and Sakura-kun. Apparently Naruto is something of a folk hero there, and they are more than willing to do their part to find him. Tsunade smiled at that. To know that an entire country considered Naruto a hero they would willingly search for was very good to her, as she was told how the mission in Wave Country played out by Kakashi. With the location of Wave Country and its fleets ready to aid the search teams, it would not be long before they would find Sakura and Naruto, though what were the two doing on the island at the very moment? She hoped that Naruto and Sakura were all right and had not done anything foolish. She shook her head at the thought. She knew Naruto had a long-time crush on Sakura, and while they were getting along well, it would take a very serious situation for the two to do anything about their feelings. She had no idea what was about to happen. Back in the camp, the two faced one another. Naruto looked at his Kage Bushin and saw the blood-red eyes of the Kyuubi, and for the first time, he got to speak with the Kyuubi out in the open. The possessed Kage Bushin then spoke in an animalistic voice. You know something, Kit? You really have to explain to me why. Why what? What the heck are you talking about now? The Kage Bushin glared and replied. You know already what I'm talking about. It's about you and that pink-haired girl you've been crushing over for the past 10 years. You're referring to Sakura-chan. Yes, I am referring to her, you twit. You have done a lot of dumb things for the past 10 years. And a good portion of those said stupid things were for her sake. I care for Sakura-chan, is that hard to understand? The Kage Bushin growled and didn't lash out at him, but Naruto knew that the Kyuubi would love nothing more than to slug him cold. The Kyuubi, however, was making its move, hoping that its plans would not suddenly go up in flames. This was testy ground between the two of them, but the sooner the boy admitted his deepest secret, then it would be worth it. At first, no. When you were still in the academy and still the cheeky little kid that you were at the time, I watched you make smiles and did all sorts of jokes and pranks to get everyone's attention, especially her attention. Back then it was understandable that you had this crush on her, but when you got older and so did she, things began to get way overboard for me. What are you talking about? Listen, Kit. Do you have a clue on how many times you've tried to get her attention and she shoots you down like a falling ton of bricks? You've tried time and again to be closer to her and she treats you worse than dirt. She calls you annoying, considers you worthless and more, and don't even think of denying those things, you know what I say is true. Naruto looked at the ground for a second and then looked the cage bushin and replied. You're right, but I don't care at all. That's the damn problem. No matter how many times you've tried, she breaks your heart, and yet you do everything in your power to help her anyway. You remember that time you managed to have that Uchiha brat Sasuke healed by the Hokage? I haven't. Good thing then, you remember how you felt that day when you saw her cry all over that guy. You were jealous and heartbroken, but you were mature enough to let them be, even if you felt like that girl stabbed you in the bloody heart. I haven't forgotten. Damn right you haven't. Then he decided to side with that snake-summoning bastard Orochimaru anyway, and you decided to go after him and you nearly got killed many times. He used the Chidori to kill you for Kami's sake, and you nearly died for her happiness. You risked your life and mine to save that traitorous bastard, and when you failed, you still wanted to save him. He was my friend. The cage bushin growled and replied. Ha, some friend he was, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Tell me honestly, even if she doesn't respond to you, never gives you back the same love you want, you're still willing to fight and make her happy. Yes, I want her to be happy and that makes me happy. Even if she'll never love you back, not the way you hoped and dreamed for. Naruto nodded and replied. Yes. The cage bushin shook its head and replied. You'll always love Sakura then. So, how long would you wait for her to love you back anyway? For as long as it takes. For as long as it takes. And if she doesn't love you at all, what then, Kit? Naruto knew the truth there in the Kyuubi's words. Sakura was much nicer to him and kinder, but she was not in the level of affection he wished. But he already knew his answer to the question. He had made that answer long ago and it was never going to change no matter what happened and no matter how much time would pass him by. Then I will keep on loving her, until the day I die. The two remained silent until the Kyuubi possessed cage bushin spoke. You know something, Kit? I don't know why she even bothers loving that Sasuke brat. You love her truthfully and you were always there when she needed help. You saved her many times and you care for her happiness more than your own life. Why doesn't she see that as beyond me? At least you're honest enough to tell the truth, and you are truly strong, because you care for others, namely her. Kyuubi. Listen, kid, and you listen good. Whenever I think about it, I can't help but feel offended by the way she would cling to the hope of being with that Uchiha kid. The way I see it, you're a far better choice than that guy. You show something that in demon kind is rare and is considered a truly unique gift. You know what that is? What? Devotion. Why she can't see that is beyond me. She doesn't deserve your love, your affections and your devotion. There are many women in this world who would be utterly happy to have someone with your level of love, devotion, selflessness, and courage. She should be happy that you give it all to her, but she never responds at all to it the way you deserve. She doesn't deserve you, Kit, plain and simple. But you don't care, because you love her, right? Yes. Fine, I'll let you be, if you're willing to endure all the heartache for her happiness like you did in the past and risk your life for her. Even if she would never love you back, then I can't stop you, Kit. With that, the cage bushin poofed away and Naruto was once more all alone, and the blonde genin then got back to cleaning the fish for the dinner he was getting ready for between him and Sakura, who was coming back soon with some of the herbs to flavor the fish. However, he heard something that sounded like sobbing behind him and he turned, and to his shock, there was Sakura before him, with tears in her eyes. Naruto had no idea what was going on and spoke to Sakura. Sakura-chan, are you hurt? Naruto stood up to help Sakura, but she did something that he never thought she would ever do. She ran over to him and hugged him tightly, and she suddenly kissed him deeply on the lips, stunning the blonde genin even further as he felt his lips being covered by her own, and the feel of her hot tears on his face was something he never felt before. When she finally released her lip lock on him, she was very sad and she was about to cry, making Naruto even more worried. That is until Sakura kissed him gently this time, and he was quickly silenced by this, and he couldn't help but finally give in to the kiss and gently responded to Sakura's actions at this very moment. The two kissed each other deeply, and as soon as Naruto and Sakura parted, the blonde ninja was still recovering when Sakura spoke in a breathless voice. I'm sorry. What? I'm sorry. For everything. Sakura-chan, what are you sorry about? For all the times I've ignored you and more. I heard everything you and the Kyuubi talked about me and how things were before, but I have to know, do you really love me, Naruto-kun? Yes. But even after all I've done to you, you still love me. Yes, and I am going to prove it right here and now, but only if you'll let me. Sakura nodded and that told Naruto that she was willing to let him do just that. Lemon time. Sakura looked at Naruto, who was still shocked at the fact that she was there before him at this very moment, and the blonde ninja then began to reach out to her. And unlike before, she didn't react negatively and allowed Naruto to bring his hands closer to her body, and as soon as he touched her arms and made their way to her shoulders, she moaned out and allowed Naruto to kiss her once more, and this time with their mouths open, and they allowed their tongues to meet at the same time. Both moaned out as Naruto made his way to her hair and felt the silky strands of pink hair that he only dreamed of touching. Sakura moaned as she also reached out and touched his own hair, and to her surprise, found his hair to be rather soft to the touch and very nice to the touch as well. All his life, Naruto had hoped to finally win the heart of Sakura and be the one she loved, and more, and to know that he was now making love to the woman he loved ever since seeing Sakura walk into the academy when they were younger. Had anyone told him that he would be making love to the woman of his dreams on a deserted island, he would have considered a fanciful dream, nothing more, a beautiful dream, but a dream nevertheless. But now it was reality, and he had every intention to do his best to make this night memorable for the both of them. As they broke apart from kissing each other, Naruto looked at Sakura and silently asked her permission to remove her outer vest and then her forehead protector. Sakura nodded and Naruto reached up for the forehead protector headband first and then placed the now removed article aside, and then he reached for her vest and slowly removed it off of her, and she was now wearing only her inner sleeveless shirt, and Naruto stared unabashedly at her body. Sakura couldn't help but feel very self-conscious for some reason. At first she had no idea why she was feeling this way, but maybe it was because of the fact that this was the very first time she had allowed herself to be stripped of her clothes by anyone, most especially a man. Naruto then allowed Sakura to remove his jacket and shirt, and this time, she got to see his well-chiseled form, not an ounce of baby fat anywhere, and all pure muscle and hot skin. There were no signs of injuries whatsoever, no doubt due to the Kyuubi's chakra healing and restoring Naruto back to full health whenever he got himself injured in battle. She ran her hands on his skin and shivered a bit at the feelings she was receiving. This was the very first time she had ever done this to anyone, and it was a very good feeling as she ran her hands on Naruto's shoulders, then to his chest and then to his toned stomach, and there she felt the seal, and she looked down for a brief moment and couldn't help but feel sad, knowing that all his life he carried this burden and had suffered this all his life, and she never knew until now. She put that out of her mind and then reached down and grabbed Naruto's hands and then placed them on her chest, blushing bright red as she felt the heat of Naruto's hands on her still-covered brias as she reached for her skirt. Wow! Sakura-chan's brias feel nice. Naruto was also blushing bright red as he realized that all his wet dreams were now actually coming true, and he didn't know what to do at this very moment as he touched Sakura's brias on her shirt, and he marveled at the feel of them as despite being in chest wrappings, they felt very firm, soft and of a good size. He was eager to see just how much Sakura had grown. And he was about to get his chance as Sakura removed her skirt and then allowed it to pool at her feet, and she then stepped out of the puddle of cloth and then moved away wearing only her sandals, shorts, and the inner shirt, and she wasted no time in removing her sandals first, then her knee pads, followed by her elbow pads, and then by her shirt and shorts, leaving her in her chest wrappings in her white underwear. Naruto was blushing bright red and so was Sakura. After all, this was the first time they had ever seen each other this way. Though that was not technically true, Sakura had on more than one occasion seen him nearly bare nod more than once, when they were younger, and now that they were older, even more so when they were on the island. Sakura tried hard to fight her growing attraction to her teammate but was failing greatly at the task, and learning the true depth of Naruto's feelings for her had made it all the more impossible. But this time, she was not going to let it be. She wanted to see just how much Naruto loved her. She reached behind her back and began to untie the chest wrappings that were on her body at the moment, and sure enough, the wrappings began to fall down and she was now only dressed in her white panties, and the sight for Naruto was incredible. Naruto gazed at Sakura hotly, and for good reason. She had indeed grown in many ways. He could see that she was lithe, slender, and her body was firm and strong, and while she was not very large in the brias department as he could see, her brias were certainly well formed and were right for her height and build. She had slender hips and womanly curves all over, and he could see the patch of pink hair between her thighs through the thin cloth of her panties, which to his ever-growing joy were wet already. And Naruto couldn't help himself as he stared at the picture of loveliness before him at the moment, and he felt his body become even hotter as he stared without restraint at her. Sakura felt like she should sock Naruto in the head for looking at her so hotly, but instead she wanted him to see her buck nod at this very moment, and she couldn't help but stare at him as well. He was certainly a lot better looking than he was when they were younger all those years before. Granted, it had been only 2.5 years, but a lot has changed, even more so since the time they had been on this island. She couldn't help but realize how wet she was at the moment, and it felt right to her. She had never felt like this before, and it was a very delicious sensation to feel. She wondered for a moment if she was all right in Naruto's eyes. She didn't have to worry for too long as Naruto reached her and hugged her tightly, allowing their nearly gnawed bodies to touch once more, and that made Sakura gasp at the sensations, and shiver at the cool winds coming in from the beach. Naruto saw this and gently guided Sakura in their well-lit shelter, thanks to the lamps that they had been able to salvage from the ship when it ran aground. As Naruto got the lamps working, he made his way to help Sakura sit down on the mattresses he had made before, using soft cloth to cover the leaf and grass piles underneath. Sakura sat down and Naruto then did the same thing, and then he gently kissed Sakura once more, and she responded with equal measure and emotion. The two kissed each other deeply as they slowly reached for the last vestiges of clothing they each had. Naruto's boxers were tight on his hips as there was a massive tent there at the moment, and when they both removed the cloth, Sakura blushed bright red as she saw Naruto say, he was big, nearly 9 inches, at least at her current estimate, as her logical brain was set aside and her female instincts were in the command chair at the moment. Wow! Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled a bit and blushed as he slowly removed her own clothes and she helped him remove her panties, and Naruto gazed hotly at Sakura say. The deep pink hair was soft and glistening from her sweetness, and Naruto was getting more heated as he leaned over Sakura and she leaned back, and she saw the utter love, devotion, passion, and desire in Naruto's deep blue gaze. She felt even more aroused and in love as she reached out and touched his face, and he responded to her touch by closing his eyes and smiling softly as she touched his face. I never knew how good it feels. The bliss and joy Naruto showed as she touched his face with her hand alone made Sakura feel happy, and she brought him down for another kiss, and they kissed passionately as Naruto gently caressed Sakura's body, and in such a very gentle but passionate way as if he was afraid to hurt her, making her heart feel even more warm as she touched him as well, feeling his hard, hot, and strong body on top of her own. Sakura gasped as Naruto touched her wet say with his hands, and they broke their gentle kiss, and Naruto looked longingly at Sakura, silently asking her permission to do this to her. She smiled and responded with her own hand touching his own say and gently caressing it, telling him to go ahead. Naruto did so and slowly parted her wet say and then gently pushing his fingers with utter slowness and caution, making Sakura gasp. Naruto-kun, ah. Sakura-chan. You feel so wet, hot, it's wonderful. Naruto gently moved his fingers in Sakura's wet say as his beloved squirmed under him as he kissed her lips, then her face, and then made his way to her chest, and Sakura gasped as he lavished kisses on her breasts, and she was ecstatic as she guided him with her hands as he licked her nipples gently on either breast apart from sousing and nipping them gently, making her feel as if she was in heaven. Sakura's juices began flow out of her say and it was delicious to her, and Naruto continued to kiss and suckle her breasts with passionate desire and moving his fingers in her say, and both actions were driving her crazy as she moaned, gasped, and shouted her passion and desire, and this was going on forever, until Naruto finally succeeded in making Sakura come, and the pink-haired kunoichi screamed out her release in a loud voice of pleasure and desire. Naruto-kun. Sakura's scream belied her release as Naruto felt her say caress his fingers, and the wetness that covered his hand nearly blew his mind right out through sensation alone, and the results in his mind were utterly worth it as he looked at Sakura panting and moaning before him, her form covered in sweat and her breasts moving in a very erotic pattern as she gathered her breath. He tasted her sweet juices and he relished his lover's taste, and when she was fully recovered in energy and strength, she looked lovingly at him and she had an idea. Naruto-kun, it's my turn, lie down. Naruto didn't ask or argue with the beautiful and new woman who was now there in front of him, and she then leaned over him and they kissed one another deeply, and that was when Sakura moved forward and then she straddled Naruto with her wet and dripping sei over his head as she was facing in the other direction. She smiled and then leaned forward and she was now before his COC and she spoke to Naruto. Let's make each other happy. Sakura-chan. Sakura ran her hands gently on Naruto's hard and eager sei and Naruto groaned out in pleasure and joy as he felt Sakura caress his COC. He looked upward and saw the beautiful sight of her wet sei before him and he could see the glistening moisture there, and without wasting any time, he managed to reach upward with his hands and brought Sakura's wet sei closer and he leaned forward and kissed her lips and Sakura moaned out as she continued to caress his COC. Naruto-kun. Yes. Naruto relished the sweet taste and delved deeper into Sakura's wet sei and he moved back a bit and kissed the wetness and parted the outer lips of her sei and saw the inner lips and saw the deep pink color and his lust grew and he continued to lick and kiss his lover's wet sei and he pushed his tongue deeper into her sei and he was in heaven as he smelled Sakura's scent. It was a bit musky but very nice and the taste was like fresh honey. Sakura relished the sensations flooding her body at this very moment and she proved it as she moaned and screamed her pleasure, and it was then that she did her own part and kissed Naruto's COC with quick but hot kisses from the head to the base, and then she caressed his sack with her free hands, being gentle so not to hurt Naruto in any fashion, keeping her superhuman strength under proper control as she caressed his COC, and then she opened her mouth and licked the tip of Naruto's COC and took the small drop of pre-cum and found the taste greatly to her liking, and she began to lick Naruto's COC gently and with great desire, and the effects were evident. As Naruto moaned out in pleasure and increased his own actions on Sakura's wet sei, and Sakura then opened her mouth and calmed herself down and slowly licked and soused Naruto's COC, and when she was ready she began to take in Naruto's COC, and the feeling of her lover's sei in her mouth was making Sakura even wetter and made her feel even greater pleasure. Naruto was moaning out in pleasure as the feeling of Sakura taking in his COC into her hot and wet mouth was addicting, and he moved away from her puss and shouted out her own pleasure. Sakura-chan. Sakura took in as much of her lover's COC as she could manage at the moment, and as soon as she felt ready, she began to move her head up and down, careful with her teeth so not to cut and hurt Naruto, and the results were worth it, as the feel of making Naruto even hotter and being given delicious pleasure in exchange for making Naruto happy was intoxicating. She had heard about this being done before, and despite not showing it, she was reading many books on many things and the idea of doing them was in her mind, and the pleasure that came from doing this position that was known as the 69 or something like that was certainly worth the effort. The two continued with their actions and Naruto felt like he was going to die right there and now, as the sensations were enough to drive him to the brink as he continued to play with Sakura's wet sei, using his fingers like before in union with his tongue as well, and the results were evident as Sakura's sei became wetter with his actions and her moans were getting louder by the second, and the vibrations made him even more aroused. Sakura was enjoying the feel of Naruto's fingers, lips, and tongue on her wet and hot sei. It was unlike anything she had ever dreamed of at all, and she never wanted to replace the feelings of this union between man and woman. Naruto-kun. Yes, Sakura-chan, The two were utterly enjoying this situation and the wondrous sensations, and it was inevitable that they would reach their respective limits, and both came. Sakura moaned out her pleasure as she felt Naruto's COC twitch one final time, and she felt the very first spurt of his seed hitting her throat, and that was quickly followed by several more streams of Naruto's hot seed in her mouth. The taste was nice, not too salty and not too bad, but sweet and nice, and thick too. It was nice. For Naruto, he saw Sakura's sei release more of her wetness and he lapped up as much of the delicious moisture as he could manage at the moment as some were flowing down her thighs. The two cleaned each other's sei a bit more, with Naruto lapping up the wetness from Sakura's still hot and wet puss and Sakura licking away the last traces of seed from Naruto's sei. As soon as that was done, Sakura got off Naruto and then lay back on the bed and looked at Naruto, who looked back at her with the same heated stare, and she smiled. Now, Naruto got the message and got off the bed and headed towards Sakura as she parted her legs once more, and he was allowed to see her sei once more and saw that she was once more wet, and the wetness was staining the cloth they used as a bed sheet. Naruto leaned over Sakura and he gently leaned down over his lover and they kissed each other deeply, tasting each other faintly, and then Naruto got ready and with a little correction, He was now in the right position and his COC was now at Sakura's wet sei, and with a nod from the pink-haired kunoichi, he pushed his sei deeply into Sakura's waiting sei. Naruto-kun. Sakura-chan. Despite the fact that she had torn her hymen before, due to her life as a ninja, Sakura felt some pain as she had never felt this sensation of her sei being filled to the brim, and it was painful at first, but Naruto was quick on the situation and was gentle in his actions as he gently pushed in, making sure to do so slowly to make sure he didn't hurt Sakura, as she was still very much a virgin in many ways. This was the first time she would be making love to a man her age after all. Oh. Yes, that's it, Naruto-kun. Sakura-chan, you're so hot, tight, it's amazing. As soon as he was buried to the hilt in her wet sei, Naruto could only gasp out in pleasure as he got used to the wetness, warmth, and tightness in Sakura's sei, and as soon as Sakura's expression of pain faded and was no longer there did he look at her. She smiled as she also got used to the feel of him in her most private place. It felt so full, so hot, and so right. She opened her eyes and nodded to Naruto. And with the signal given, Naruto began to move his hips slowly and gently, hoping that Sakura had been able to relax and feel more comfortable. He wanted this night to be one of pleasure, love, passion, and desire, not of pain, heartache, dislike, and broken hopes. He wanted Sakura to cry out his name in pleasure and bliss, and he had every intention of making her do just that. Naruto gritted his teeth as Sakura's inner sheath caressed and held his COC as he pulled back, and it was torture. Pleasurable torture as he was nearly out and then slowly pushed his way back into her warm and wet sei as she moaned and cried out in passion and desire. Oh yes, like that, Naruto. Oh Kami, you're so big. Sakura-chan, you're so tight. As Naruto got into the rhythm and movement of his hips, he gently leaned forward as he continued to thrust slowly in Sakura's wet sei, and he then kissed Sakura, who responded with equal passion and pleasure as the two continued to love one another in a very strong way. The kiss lasted for a minute or two as their tongues touched and dueled with one another in a way that would have qualified as a sei act all on its own. They then separated and Naruto caressed Sakura's breasts gently and with great care, holding, massaging and playing with the two orbs of flesh the way Sakura enjoyed it. Sakura was far from idle as she held Naruto's head as he worshipped her breasts, and she would run her hands on his body and she would moan near his ear and whisper loving words and passionate moans that made Naruto even more determined to pleasure her as he began to pick up the pace with his actions. Naruto-kun. Sakura-chan. Naruto was increasing his speed as he moved in and out of Sakura's wet sei, and the sensations were driving him and Sakura insane with pleasure and desire. It was intoxicating and wonderful indeed for the both of them, and it was becoming nearly impossible for them to contain the pleasure, nor did they want to either as the pleasure grew. Naruto's hips were moving faster now as he pushed his COC deeper into Sakura's wet sei, and Sakura relished the pleasure as Naruto was hitting the spot where her pleasure was at its most focused. The pink-haired kunoichi was in heaven, and so was Naruto as the pleasure threatened to drive them to the very limits of their minds and bodies. More. Oh yes. Harder, deeper. Sakura-chan. You feel so good. Sakura wrapped her legs around Naruto's waist as he continued to move his hips in a great sense of speed, and Naruto was making her feel more alive than she had ever felt as she arched and held him tightly for dear life. The pleasure was enough to drive her to nearly lose her sanity as she screamed out her pleasure and joy as the sensations flooded her body. Naruto continued to move his COC in and out of Sakura's wet sei. The wetness, tightness, softness, and heat coming from her sei was driving him mad with desire and pleasure, even more so with the sounds of their lovemaking and the way she shouted his name in pleasure and joy. It was amazing to him as he continued with his actions on her sei. And they were happy as they felt their bodies reach the limits. Sakura-chan, I'm going to. Me too, Naruto-kun. It didn't take very long for both of them to scream out their joy and pleasure as they both came at the very same time. The two held each other tightly as the storm of pleasurable sensation flowed in them, threatening to drive them off the cliff edge of their sanity as they had come at the very same time. Naruto felt Sakura's womanhood move and caress his COC in such a way that defied anything that the pervy sage came up with in his novels. Nothing, absolutely nothing beat the real thing in his mind from here on out. He felt his release, and so did Sakura as she held him tightly. The blonde genin even thrust in a few more times to make sure he would etch those sensations deeply into his very soul and mind. Sakura felt her body explode in pleasure the very second she came and felt Naruto's own release as his seed touched her walls, the feeling of the hot and thick sperm hitting her inner walls drove the pink-haired kunoichi to the limits as she came again and she felt her world go bright in an explosion, and as she felt the pleasure subside, she was amazed that Naruto had not lost his hardness and she was quickly aroused by that as she moved upward and was now straddling Naruto. As soon as they were ready, Sakura made her move. She began to kiss Naruto at first and as soon as they were done with their torrid lip lock, the pink-haired kunoichi began to move her body up and down, and Naruto's COC was still deep inside Sakura's wet and hot sei and the pink-haired kunoichi was holding on for dear life to her lover as she continued to ride Naruto. Oh yes, this is wonderful. Naruto-kun. Sakura-chan. Yes. Naruto felt like he was in heaven as they continued with their actions towards one another and the pleasure was worth every moment in his mind. And that was what made him kiss Sakura with intense desire and she gave just as much intense feeling as well as she continued to move her body up and down his sei as they kissed each other deeply and caressed each other with their hands and when they broke the kiss, he licked and kissed her neck passionately and then lavished attention to his breast, making Sakura blush deep red and she continued to move her body and hips as she relished the feel of her lover's sei entering her to the very core of her womanhood. The pleasure was great for the two of them and it was not long before the two of them reached their own limits. Naruto-kun. Sakura-chan. The two felt their release once more and it was a very delicious wave of sensations fought them all as Naruto felt Sakura's inner sheath massage and milk his sei like a soft but hot, wet, and tight vice and Sakura felt the release of Naruto's hot seed filling every corner of her womanhood and the feelings were amazing indeed. The two felt their hearts beating at the same time, and to their amazement, their hearts were beating together at the very same time. Naruto leaned forward and as he felt the pleasure and joy begin to flow all over him and Sakura as well as they felt the results of their latest orgasm, Sakura did likewise and then they looked at one another as they still hugged one another and they felt their heartbeats begin to slow down a bit and they looked at one another and they once more deeply kissed one another. They finally parted from their kiss and they had their hands on each other's chest as they looked at one another, deep emerald eyes looking back at deep sapphire blue eyes. It was then that Naruto spoke. Sakura-chan, do you remember what you asked me when we met again in Konoha? Sakura nodded at that as she recalled asking him if she had changed a great deal from before, and she was not happy with his answer at that time, but she wondered just what was Naruto up to with this. I do, and you said I didn't change at all. I never told you the truth about that, the reason is that, you were as beautiful as ever. You mean that Naruto-chan? Oh yes, you are always beautiful in my eyes Sakura-chan, when you smile, laugh, and seem hard at work, you are always beautiful, even when you're angry. Sakura couldn't help but look at her lover and see the truth in his eyes and Naruto then reached for the blanket nearby and he covered the two of them and he was holding her tight and in each other's arms the two lovers held one another, and Naruto spoke to Sakura with conviction. There's no other woman I want to be with than you Sakura-chan, I love you. Sakura merely held Naruto closer and snuggled into his warm and safe embrace and the two finally went to sleep in each other's arms. But one question lingered in her mind as they slept, but she relaxed and decided to ask him the question when they were awake, but the hard part finding it in herself to ask this question to him. The next day, Sakura opened her eyes as she was confused at first on what had happened last night, and when the memories came back, she was feeling a great deal of warmth in her heart at those memories. Naruto said it. He loves me, he always had ever since the day we met in the academy. Sakura turned and there was the blonde in question sleeping soundly and holding her in his embrace and she couldn't help but realize that she and he were still gnawed from last night's romp. She blushed as she recalled how energetic, passionate, yet gentle and wonderful Naruto was to her. She had dreamed of the same coming from Sasuke before, back when she was younger, but now she felt that she had moved on, and found the one she wanted. Maybe the old saying was right in this case. Love comes in the most unexpected places. She looked at Naruto and smiled as she traced his face gently. To think that she had treated him like dirt all those years made her very ashamed of herself once more. He always cared for me. He saved me many times over. He loved me enough risk his lifetime and again for me, and I treated him so badly. What a fool I was. She choked back a sob at the memories and then calmed herself and thought about his confession to the cage bushin that held a fragment of his demon resident. She recalled hearing them argue about her and his feelings for her. She listened on how the real Naruto defended her against the Kyuubi's harsh but truthful statements, how he had risked so much for her to be happy, because it made him feel happy as well, even if he had to give up his love for her to make her happy, and how he would be there for her and he would always love her, even if she didn't love him back. That made her cry once more. Sakura-chan, are you alright? Sakura opened her eyes and there was Naruto looking at her, his deep blue eyes looking at her with concern, worry, and compassion, things she had seen before in his eyes when they were still younger, but always ignored and denied, and it further shamed her that she had treated him so badly when they were younger. She didn't deserve to be looked at with those emotions, and despite her desire not to say it, she did. Why do you always stand by me, Naruto-kun, after all I've done to you? Naruto knew that they were back from last night. She was very much shocked as he was. He had been so wrapped up with his argument with the Kage Bushin then held the Kyuubi for a brief time that he had not noticed her. He had a sneaky suspicion his resident had been planning this the whole time, but for once he was not mad at the Kyuubi. Because I love you, Sakura-chan. I fell in love with you the day I saw you in the academy. I know it's weird, but you stole my heart the very second you walked in the classroom, and no matter what happened, I always loved you. But, I want to know, you were always there for me, no matter what happened, and I hurt you for a long time, yet you loved me. Why? Because I do. It's not hard to understand. I love you, Sakura-chan, always. Sakura saw that there was no lie or deception in Naruto's words. He meant it and she felt that he would never deceive her. Naruto was too honest, too compassionate, too kind, and too noble to lie to anyone, especially her. Because he loved her with all his heart and soul, and he would love her to the day he died. And that simple truth made her finally smile. The pink-haired kunoichi then reached out and kissed her lover and held him closer to her, kissing him as passionately as she could manage, and Naruto without reservation kissed her back with equal passion and affection, proving yet again that he did and will always love her no matter what happened, and that was enough for Sakura to finally do something that she knew she should have done years ago. She said goodbye to her past love for Sasuke, the love that was never reciprocated and scorned, the love that was doomed from the start. She cared for him as a friend, but that was the end of her love for him, the day he showed how much he had changed and the day he came close to killing Naruto with his own hands began the death of any romantic feelings towards him. And she would never forget or forgive him what he had nearly done. She finally found the one she loved, and even if it took her so long to figure it out, she was never going to let him go ever again, and she would fight to protect Naruto until they could finally be at peace. As they broke away from one another, she hugged Naruto and whispered to him, I love you, Naru-chan. Naruto felt his heart beat faster at that statement, and he couldn't help but feel even more alive than before. He had waited 15 years for those words to come from Sakura's mouth, and he had feared and dreaded that his dream of finally being loved by her would die at last after all these years, but not this time. He proved to her last night and this morning that he loved her, and now, she loved him back. It made him feel great. Sakura could see the swelling of emotions in Naruto's deep blue eyes, and the way his heartbeat felt on her chest told her that he was utterly happy, and she was happy as well, and she replied, How long would you wait for me to say those words, if I didn't say them now? I'd wait forever, Sakura-chan. Sakura smiled and replied, Then get used to hearing those words for the rest of your life. I will. Later in the morning, Naruto had managed to capture some rabbits and had them roasting on a fire that he made using some dry grass, wood, a flint rock in his kunai, and the fire was ready. Sakura was busy resting and gathering herbs for any medical salves they could use while they waited for rescue. All the while, they had spent time being close together and kissing and cuddling, things he had always dreamed of doing with her but never thought he would at all. After some time he heard a certain voice. Well now, I guess this means that you two are officially a couple. Hey, did you plan this, Kyuubi? Me. What makes you think that, Kit? I'm not that dense. You could have just settled for having a conversation with me mentally that night, but you managed to trick me into making that Kage Bushin for you to use. You wanted to do that so I could talk and let Sakura-chan overhear us arguing. You wanted her to hear us, didn't you? Hey, I always knew you were not as dumb as they thought. Pretty perceptive, Kit. You're right. I did plan it all out, and I dare say it paid off immensely. You sly fox. Why, thank you. That's actually a compliment to a fox spirit, you know. Besides, I was getting tired of your wet dreams and innermost feelings involving that pink-haired babe, so I figured it's high time I did something about it. Hey, I guess I owe you. HMPH. Don't you get all mushy on me yet, kid. I did you a favor, so you do me a favor. If it involves letting you loose, then forget it, but if it's something that we can both accomplish, then fine. Fair enough. When we face the Akatsuki, and you really need help, then you don't hesitate to ask from me, because I'll promise not to make you into a berserker. Sound fair enough for you? Fair enough. Just promise me you won't hit Sakura-chan or anyone I care about. Done deal. It was then that Naruto and Sakura decided to go for a quick hunt for fish in their boat, and after having a full and hearty breakfast they moved out, armed with the bamboo spears that they were able to craft with hard string and their spare kunai with long and very sturdy bamboo. As they went fishing for their new supply of fish, it was then that Sakura spotted a large shape and she was awed by the sight of the sail, and she got Naruto's attention very quickly. Naruto-chan. There's something on the horizon. Naruto quickly looked in that direction and his eyes widened, and he grabbed the small tube and used the large quartz crystals he had with him and used the primitive telescope that the Kyuubi had taught him, and he was ecstatic as he recognized the undeniable sing of a ship. It's a ship, Sakura-chan. The two made their way back to the beach and quickly lit their signal fire, and sure enough, in less than an hour or so, the massive billowing smoke was now moving upward, and the two looked on, hoping against hope that their signal fire would be seen, and the minute they looked through the telescope, they were awed by the fact that the ship was now heading for them. They saw it. Naruto-chan, we're saved. Sakura quickly hugged Naruto, and the blonde quickly embraced his lover back, and his own smile was equal to her own smile as they looked and saw that the ship was now heading towards them. Rescue had finally come for them. Epilogue. Naruto fixed himself up and headed off to grab his forehead protector, as he had gotten out of his shower in his apartment to answer the door and was now dressed in his normal clothes. He had recently placed an alarm bell to warn him of anyone making their presence known to his home at the moment. The blonde genin had been back for a week or two, as he was briefed on the current situation when he had been gone for a while. Sakura had been back with Tsunade training in more advanced medical jutsu, and he was eager to finally relax and take a break. However, they had decided to keep their outward friendship when dealing with others, while in truth the two of them were very close to one another and even more in private, and that was something that Naruto had longed for and dreamed of for as long as he can recall when he was part of the original Team 7 lineup. As he opened the door, he was shocked and delighted to see Sakura at his door, and she was dressed to kill as she was wearing a deep white kimono that had designs of the sakura blossoms that were the flowers where she got her first name, and she wore a delicate and fashionable obi with several different but fitting colors, and the deep red cord that held the obi there completed the package, and she wore a decorative hairpin on her pink hair. The pink-haired kunoichi smiled, and she then spoke to her beau friend. "You're ready, Naruto-chan?" "Oh yes, let's go." The two went out on their first ever night out for a late-night movie. Everyone they knew in the old Rookie 9 were asleep, and therefore they were on their own. The movie proved to be worth the money that both had saved up for a while, and they enjoyed it immensely. As the move ended and they went out together, they made their way to the old training field that was the site of the bell test when Sasuke was still with them and when they were reunited. Naruto then touched the very same log where he had been tied up so long ago and grinned a bit at the memories, while Sakura also smiled, and the two thought about the past and the future, and the pink-haired kunoichi had a very interesting idea as she could sense no one around but the two of them at the moment. She moved towards Naruto and then hugged him from behind and kissed him by the neck, making Naruto gasp a bit at the action as he had been so into the memories of the past that he had no idea what was going on. "Sakura-chan." The kunoichi smiled at the endearment and then released her lover and went to the very same tree and removed the cords that held her obi and removed the cloth away, and she looked at Naruto and smiled devilishly. "Care for a little love in the moonlight, Naruto Koishi?" Naruto gulped at that, as this was something that was new to him, in the sense that they were in the village and there was a big chance someone might see them. He was turned on by the idea yet was not sure that Sakura being serious. Are you sure?" Sakura smiled and parted her kimono a bit to allow Naruto see a portion of her nod form, and she posed seductively on the log and replied, "Oh yes." Naruto grinned and went forward. as he could tell that his girlfriend and lover was dead serious, and he wasted no time as he removed his jacket and his black t-shirt in record time, and then he moved to kiss Sakura deeply, and she responded in kind as she hugged her lover and boyfriend as he lifted one of her legs and exposed her long and shapely leg and hips as he then removed her kimono carefully, and now Sakura was gloriously gnawed before him as the two proceeded to make love in the moonlight. All the while the Kyuubi was enjoying the show and was grinning from ear to ear, which was not hard for a demon fox to do in the first place. Thanks for listening. In the next part. In the meantime, please leave a review. I would love to hear your feedback, especially if it helps me improve the overall story.